Now we come to the time when the entire theme as to what architecting education for a new age India means. We have with us Dr. Anirban Ganguly, who is the member of the Central Advisory Board on Education and also the director of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation. He needs no further introduction. I will request him to deliver his theme note address at this.
Thank you, Raghav. This sounds very, very verbose theme note address. I'm not going to do anything of that kind, and especially in the presence of Swamiji. Had I known that Swamiji is going to be present on the dais, I would have sat there in front, because I don't have the adhikara to speak on education or deliver a theme note address in his presence. Often in times of great challenges or of self-doubt, of an deep inner introspection, it is Swamiji's words, his vision of education, that has given us and given me especially great strength and great conviction that yes, they alone live who live for others. So it's indeed a deep honor, Swami Atma Priyanandaji, my agraj in the cave, to be able to stand in front of you here. And I thank Raghav for giving me this wonderful opportunity. I'm really fascinated and delighted to see the range, and right on this dais, this entire range is represented in one dimension. Who today really focuses, or are we focusing enough? And by today I mean in the last 70 years, have we focused enough on local languages, expression through local languages? And so my theme address is not going to be a theme address, but a kind of thinking aloud. And I take that link and go back 100 years, February 1916, at the foundation of BHU. Mahatma Gandhi gave the founding address. He gave the theme address, and he brought up three topics, three issues there. He first spoke about cleanliness. He said, if you can't keep your house, your temples, your localities clean, how on earth are you going to manage Swaraj? And then he spoke about the necessity of education through one's own languages. He said, I am ashamed that I have to address you in a foreign language, and therefore pardon me. But what he meant was that we need to explore and express ourselves in our own languages, and that there should be a certain amount of pride, a certain amount of conviction while doing that. And of course the third theme was, he spoke about the need to develop, uphold, and further make scientific our agriculture, in a sense support our farmers. So anyway, but that's not connected to directly to the theme of education in that sense, but these 2 points he started. December 2014, Prime Minister Modi was in Banaras Hindu University, and he spoke about Shiksha ki Sanskriti. He said that we need to introspect whether we are losing this culture of education. The education system is not meant to produce robots, but to develop a holistic humanist vision, Purna Manav Man, along with science and technology. And I think the fountainhead of our inspiration, Swami Vivekananda, starts off his educational vision right from that point. As he says, we are only polishing the exterior, what about our interior? Now, in the introduction here, Raghav mentioned the anniversary, the centenary of the First World War. I also wanted to tell you that 2014 was the centenary of the fundamental unity of India, the opus written by Radhakumud Mukherjee. And why am I referring to that? Radhakumud Mukherjee was a product of the national education movement. and the national education movement inspired from Swami Vivekananda, taken further forward by Sister Nivedita and Sri Aurobindo and Satish Chandra Mukherjee, Bipin Chandra Pal, Lokmanya Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, the entire gamut of nationalist leaders. The objective of the national education movement was to evolve an Indian system and a system of education which was responsive to and inspired from India's civilizational experience, from her civilizational repository. And it's very interesting, and I don't stop referring to that perhaps the anti-colonial movement in India was the only movement worldwide which had, along with the political movement, a parallel, unceasing educational movement. And every political leader of that period was also an educationist and has expressed himself or herself on education matters. And that by itself forms a formidable repository of the vision of Indian education. And mind you, and I must reiterate this point here because there are many perceptions which are misperceptions in a sense. As Pandit Deendayal Upadhyay would say, he said, we are not the keepers of a museum. We are not interested in archaeology. We do not want to build up an India which is 5,000 years old. But all the values that are perennial in our civilizational quest, it is necessary, it is imperative that those values be restated in the current context. And that is what education, Indian education, aspires to do. So the quest for national education was that. And the Fundamental Unity of India was one of those booklets which was a product of the Bengal National College, which emerged from that and which said that there is an underlying unity, spiritual, cultural, in India. It is this which needs to be explored. It is this which needs to be internalized, because it is this which ultimately sustains our civilizational march. And so therefore, I just like to keep drawing those parallels, you know. So I just want to make a few more points because we have started a little late and time is short, and there are so many practitioners actually here. I'm more of a theoretician. There's no practice, it's only theory. So education in India was always a community effort. So I say that PPP was already there in our civilizational quest, because Danam to Vidya was considered the highest Danam. And so you had communities, you had village. If you look at the Chola inscriptions, you had village endowments for colleges, for hostels. So while the ruler gave his endowment, the people, the ordinary people, and if you read G.W. Leitner's report on state of education in Punjab in the 1890s, Leitner clearly states that in India, the farmer, even the robber, the ordinary shopkeeper, they vie with each other to donate to education, to support education. So education in the Indian context was a very community and was a very participative approach. We had world universities here. Binoy Sarkar talks about India having a world sense. So it's very interesting that Indian education right from the beginning, when you had these universities, India already had developed a world sense. That is one of the essence of our education, that you develop a world sense. And then, for example, there's this example of the university in Nadia, which had a very interesting system. And this was a system which was broadly followed across. In that universities, and there's a report as late as 1790s by a Westerner, probably those reports are more authentic for some, and these are all recorded, where he says that this university in Nadia, it was the Sanskrit university in Nadia, this university in Nadia, it has a very interesting composition. Those who are very well off and can afford to have financed their own education. Those deserving ones who are unable to do so but are extremely talented, the university supports them. The university is supported in turn by endowments from a number of villages, and in this university, it is the cardinal rule that education is through a process of dialogue. So, today when there is this argument that, we are all rote learners, we were not always rote learners. We were learners through dialogue. In this university, the process of education is dialogic, and the teacher had to display extreme patience. Any teacher who lost his patience forfeited the right to teach. This was the cardinal maxim in that university. So, what I'm trying to say is we had a wonderfully laid out, structured framework of education which needs to be rediscovered, which needs to be re-examined, and dimensions of that approach, principle, needs to be reincorporated in the current context. Now, I would just like to, because there are many things and Raghav doesn't give time to prepare, nor does he give sufficient time to speak. So I'll conclude. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was obviously a very well-known educationist. First industry minister of Free India's in Free India's first cabinet, youngest vice chancellor of Calcutta University, and statesman par excellence. But obviously education, like Dr. Radhakrishnan, education was very close to his heart. And there's a very interesting series of his convocation addresses which gives an insight into the early thinking on education post-independence. And it's very interesting that one of his sentences, I think every government will be very happy to listen to this. One of his sentences is, and this was when he was drafting his convocation address to the Vishwabharati University in his own handwriting, he has corrected. He says, education is one sphere of activity on which the state can never be accused of overspending. If our planning is sound and administration correct, the larger we spend, the more solid will the results leading to national prosperity and solidarity be. But I'd just like to conclude by one observation. We are working on a book of his speeches on education, discourses on education rather. And it's very interesting. So I have named it Ashta Siddhantas, which has emerged from his overall thought of education. And I just thought that would be extremely relevant here. So one is, of course, he says, first is Swaraj. We need to acquire Swaraj and hold on and perpetuate Swaraj. Because he says that ultimately the battle of India's freedom will be fought and won in the field of education. Second is, he says, there must be less of degrading poverty, less of disease and pestilence. Our social outreach and responsibility. Thirdly, the state must spend far more adequately and generously on education in all its grades. Fourth, there must be an elaborate system of elementary, secondary education which will form an enduring foundation on which the great structure of university education will be built. Fifth, education at every stage should be as cheap as possible while its quality will be maintained at a high level. Sixth, let us emphasize that universities must inspire private benefactions on a much wider scale than they have hitherto done. There is no compartmentalization, no hang-ups. Seventhly, there must be a close and honorable connection between education and trade, industry and commerce, so that men trained in different branches of practical skill and knowledge will have a natural scope for their talents. And eighth, universities must be given the amplest freedom to work out their salvation. So I think these were the early thoughts that he had on education, right at the start of our journey as an independent nation. And I've termed it the Ashta Siddhantas. It's worth pondering because it has the entire gamut. It encompasses all that you wish to do here. It brings together all the dimensions, and at the same time it gives each section a concrete role for creating the edifice of education in Free India. And obviously I really, I'm certain that there's something great which is going to emerge out of this. I see a number of my friends also here, Parth, and they're, I think, doing great work in education. And I'm delighted, deeply honored to be able to come and just, ramble off something here, but it's great. It's a great privilege to be here, especially in the presence of such eminent people and Swamiji. Thank you so much.